Welcome to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. I'm Tom Kelly, your nonprofit catalyst. As the founder of Charity Auctions Today and Donor Books, I've spent almost 2 decades helping organizations like yours break through fundraising barriers, engage communities on a deeper level, and accelerate meaningful growth. In this podcast, along with my incredible guests, we'll uncover transformational ideas, tackle challenges head-on, and share insider strategies that you won't find anywhere else. Each episode is designed to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark and beyond, because impact doesn't scale by chance, it scales by choice. So let's get started. In this episode, we explore nonprofit sustainability with Wendie Veloz. Wendie, with over 15 years of experience in social impact, shared actionable insights on what it takes for nonprofits to thrive over the long term. She broke down her unique 9-dimension sustainability model, guiding nonprofits on assessing their impact, building strong leadership, and diversifying funding. Wendie explained how organizations could evaluate and refine their strategies, whether stopping ineffective programs, involving diverse community voices, or maximizing underutilized funding sources. She emphasized the importance of leadership development and teamwork to embed sustainability practices throughout an organization, providing practical advice on attracting the right talent and engaging board members. This episode was packed with frameworks and strategies that can help nonprofits build resilience and achieve lasting impact. Don't miss this deep dive on how sustainability practices can fuel your mission forward. Wendie, welcome to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, for sure. And we're talking about a topic today that it's all about nonprofit sustainability. And sustainability to different people means so many different things. So what does nonprofit sustainability mean to you, and how do you implement it with the people you work with?
Yeah, so I think that you're right. There is a lot of room to interpret what the word sustainability means. And for me, I really focus on the sustainability of an organization as it provides the services and fulfills its natural mission as a mission-driven organization. So sometimes that means just getting to the next step over time and continuing to grow and exist. And for some organizations, they can get lost in that mission and not be able to sustain themselves. And eventually, what you'll see is that a nonprofit might fail. So in some ways, sustainability is simply the practice of being intentional and making sure that your nonprofit is not failing.
And you've worked with a lot of nonprofits in kind of putting together these strategies. What are some examples of sustainable practices that you've seen that were successful in different nonprofits?
I think the first thing is to stop doing things that don't work. There's a lot of continued investment in strategies that we might be emotionally tied to, or that we might be legacy tied to, but not necessarily ready to continue over time or not ready to change them so they are successful. And so one of the best practices that I recommend with all my clients is to take an assessment of what is actually working and what is not working, and what do you mean by working, and what does that look like for the people that you serve or the mission that you serve. And over time, what you might find is that you have to make changes to things that you are already doing, or just completely divest from a strategy that doesn't work.
Do you have an example of 1 or 2 things that you've had to go in and tell them, like, hey, this just is not working. Let's just scrap this and kind of realign our strategy?
Yeah, sometimes just a part of a strategy is something that isn't working. Like, for example, the outreach or the hiring or the recruitment for a position. There's a lot of things that could go wrong in implementing something. And when you do something, you do your best, but it doesn't always work out the way you wanted. And sometimes it takes an objective third party to come and tell you, hey, this wasn't necessarily done even the way you planned to do it. So what are we doing here? Do we want to continue to do it in this way? Or do we want to go back to the drawing board and do something different? Or do we not need to be doing this at all? And that's really the value I think a lot of clients see is they're so deep into the weeds that they're not able to zoom out and make those kinds of objective questions come to light, because sometimes it's a little difficult to answer and it might take them away from what they're doing right now.
And do you see that usually with an organization that's been more established, has just been doing the same thing for so many years that they're not even open-minded to think differently, unless somebody maybe with an outside perspective comes in and says, hey, this might not be working, and what if we try this?
That happens a lot. It also is the opposite way, where there's new organizations who don't know what they don't know. And there's a big gap in between learning by doing and actually having someone who's done things before that can help you shortcut things. So it really depends on where the organization is. And a lot of the work that I do is dependent on figuring that out. Where is this organization right now? Kind of taking the same principle that social workers work with. Where is this person right now? And how do we move forward to the goal or where they want to be in the future?
Hmm.
And with the established organizations, sometimes those are a little harder to move because, like you said, they're so set in the ways that things have traditionally been done. And it's really more of a change management process than it is really assessing things as it would be in the beginning.
What are the different ways sustainability can look in a nonprofit? Is it funding? Is it mission? What are some of the different areas that sustainability, kind of is can be implemented or fixed?
Yeah, so when I first started this business, I developed a 9 dimension model of sustainability because CDC asked me, "What do you know about sustainability?" And I said, "Well, let me tell you."
Mhm.
And it ranges from, like I said, investing in things that work and divesting from things that don't, to what does leadership look like over time? And do you have capacity building and leadership that's going to be maintained in order to continue to do the work that you're doing? It could also look like, are you actually making change and making measurable change? And what does that look like for your organization? And so, as you're doing the work of looking at these different dimensions, the reason I put them in there was because sustainability sometimes is very nebulous for people, and it's hard for people to be tangible about what action should I be taking today. And when you are looking at sort of a framework, it gives you a shortcut to be able to take actions in the different dimensions and to be able to look not only at one aspect of it, because you might have leadership today that seems fine, and then the next day your executive director leaves.
Mm.
So it's always changing. And so having a framework gives you the ability to continually look at what you're doing and say, oh, maybe we need to engage some new partners because we've been relying on the same funding sources. And if we get new partners, that might actually unlock some new funding sources for us. So things like diversifying your partners, diversifying your funding streams, those are all like listed in the framework. And I think that sometimes people really want that shortcut, but they don't necessarily know how to find it. And so that was what I was doing when I was creating this work, was to make shortcuts easy for people and make sustainability easy.
Well, and it's not just usually one person that has to implement all of these strategies. You really have to create a process so you can get the whole team involved, because one person, depending on the size of your organization, can't do everything when it comes to this.
Yeah. And a lot of the times you have to de-silo your work in order for the teams to work together on these things. And, get your board involved, to get your executive director involved and your program managers, sort of everybody on board. And that's where it becomes more of a change management kind of process, because you want people to feel like, oh, I can buy into this. And in the new vision for the organization, I see my place.
When you're working with smaller organizations, at what level of the organization do you feel it would be the right time to kind of bring in help or bring in somebody else to kind of help divvy up the workload when it comes to some of these initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you're thinking of growing, there's always usually an ask for additional people. But when you're not in a growth state, is when I like to tell people, look at who you have on your bench and see if these are the right people. Who do you have on your board? What are they doing for you? Are they fulfilling the fundraising mission that you've asked them? Who do you have as volunteers? And if you have volunteers doing pro bono services or you don't, what is it that you need in the next 2 or 3 years? And can you line up the right volunteers for pro bono services to give you some of those things for free? So it doesn't always have to look like, who are you hiring today? But it should look like, when I'm thinking about the future and what my organization is going to need to be sustainable, do I have the right talent? And am I attracting the right talent? Do I have words on my website that tell those people to come to me? Am I posting on LinkedIn all of my opportunities, even volunteer opportunities? So there's a lot of different options of what people can do, but unless they know, don't just think about your hiring.
Mhm. Yeah.
You're going to just continue to think about filling positions, getting grants, and filling more positions.
Yeah. And outside of finding new funders, how can a nonprofit kind of diversify their funding sources to ensure that their long-term financial sustainability is there and in place?
Yeah, so I wrote a blog post that I originally tried to count how many funding sources nonprofits could access because I knew there were a lot more than businesses, but I
Mhm.
wasn't really sure exactly how many. And I think I've gotten to 10 now. I've revised that blog post once. And so I went from 7 to 10. And there's things on there like earned income. Some people are not maximizing their earned income. Well, earned income is unrestricted income, which is always exciting for a nonprofit. But if you're not really strategically maximizing that part of your revenue streams, then you could be missing out on a whole bunch of no strings attached money. And there's other opportunities that people might not be using, like live streaming. And I think a lot of people remember Jerry Lewis telethons back in the day. Well, there's live streamers who will game and raise money for you from the gaming community. So there's a lot of different opportunities that just didn't exist in the past. And people may not be leveraging them simply because they just weren't part of the traditional landscape for fundraising. And they might include heavy influence in social media or online resources. And if you just don't have that in your repertoire of people who work for you, especially as a small organization, you might shy away from those options. But there are a lot more options than just individual donors and campaigns that we used to really rely on, or events like galas.
Well, you brought up a fun memory for me about the streamer raising money like the telethon. I own a company called Charity Auctions Today, and one Saturday night, I start getting all of these alerts on my phone that our server is hitting capacity, and it's a potential to crash. And I'm freaking out, like, what the heck is going on? Like, we didn't really have much scheduled. And it comes to find out some Twitch streamer was auctioning off all of his props through our auction platform, and he was live streaming everything and collecting all the bids online, and people were bidding through, obviously through his online auction through our platform, but he was live streaming it, and he was raising tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars when it was all over, because all of his even gamers were donating $5, $10, and then some were actually bidding thousands of dollars on the props. And I was like, that was the first time I've ever even heard of something like that. And it's just like thinking outside of the box is what you have to do nowadays. And with technology and influencers and streamers, it's definitely really, you can think of anything, right?
Yeah, and some nonprofits might not want to do influencer marketing because it does take a little bit of work. And you think of influencer marketing as being traditionally for bigger companies. Even my company doesn't use influencer marketing, right? And so it could be daunting to people, but it's simple as just having a volunteer who fits into that category and is willing to set it up and do it, right? And it's not
Yeah.
really been I've seen it advertised by that person. So the nonprofit doesn't even really do much except for benefit from the
Yeah.
actual streaming happening. So there's a lot of there are a lot of opportunities, and I think that if you are smart, you'll map them out for yourself and say, to your team, where are we missing the mark on what we're already doing, and what more could we do in places that might seem like new or even scary to us right now, but if we did a little exploration, we might be able to uncover some really interesting resources for ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. And let's talk about programs and services real quick. What are some strategies that a nonprofit can implement to really assess the sustainability of those programs and services?
Yeah, one of the things that happens a lot is people go from grant to grant or grantor to grantor, and they kind of mold themselves to the want of the money and whatever the desire is of the funder. That's sort of where they go exploring for the next set of what their work is going to be. So one of the things that's really helpful is as a year before any funding is over, for every program, it doesn't matter what part of the portfolio you're working on, at least a year before, to sit down and go through the dimensions of sustainability and ask some really key questions. I mapped out about 36 different key questions for people to explore, not only by themselves, but with their partners, their staff, to think about, well, like I said, are we really doing the work we want to do? Are we really serving the people that we want to serve? And if we are not, in the next iterations of our programming, what do we need to do? And what are the options for us moving forward? And it's all around this concept of having transparent conversations around sustainability. Before, what I would see is money would go away, and then suddenly people would lose their jobs. And suddenly programs would be explained to the community as just having gone away. And the community would go, well, what's up with that? You keep bringing new programs, but you're not ever going to stay with us. And you lose trust and you lose hope. And so one of the things when I was creating all of this was thinking about how can we avoid those cliffhanging moments where you're going along, you're doing great, and then the funding ends and all of a sudden the whole thing collapses. And at least a year out, you have to be transparently exploring things and exploring options. Of course, other funding is part of that, but there's so much more that can be done before you get to, oh, we just need another grant as the answer. So I think all of that to say, at the very minimum, people should be reflecting long before the end of some funding comes, because at that point, it's too late when it's in the last 6 months of trying to do anything, really for you to secure some of the things that you need to carry forward. And that would be my biggest piece of advice.
And let's talk about community engagement, because that's such an important part to the growth of a nonprofit. How can you measure community engagement and sustainability with the different programs, and what are some other ways that a nonprofit can involve the community?
This is an area I've seen people struggle with a lot, and particularly around engaging youth and keeping youth engaged over time, because usually they have a partnership with the school. They might have some youth programming and ways that they're getting access to young people to come to their things. And then those young people graduate and it's difficult for them to get a whole new batch of young people. Same thing with community members, family members, all these different commitments that people have. I think that the key to sustaining the engagement over time is to really give leadership back to those types of people who you're trying to engage, so that it becomes their initiative, it becomes their work, it becomes their priority, and you're there just to serve as a vehicle. And when I first started learning about sustainability, one of the best pieces of advice I ever received was work yourself out of a job. Build the capacity in others so that they can take what you know and exercise it in the way that empowers them to do the work for themselves. And as you recognize that you're working yourself out of the job, don't be fearful of that. Be able to understand that that's part of the process, and it's a good part of the process. And so over time, what you would ideally see is that the community leaders aren't just you're not struggling to get them in the door, you're struggling to understand really what more can you do for them so that they can be successful.
And when we're putting together all of these plans for just becoming more, sustainable and changing up some of your processes and, kind of building a sustainable nonprofit, what are some of the metrics that you like to track to really just gauge if it's working or not working?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything needs to have more than a butts in a seat metric. Most people try at minimum to count how many things have happened, how many meetings, how many partnerships, how many MOAs or MOUs. All of these things are things we try to count. But to me, those are metrics that just simply tell you your process has gone forward. They're not necessarily counting change for people. So really digging down deeper and understanding, well, for the people that I serve or the cause that I serve, what does true transformation look like? And am I able to provide that transformation reliably over and over again with the methodology that I'm doing? Because everything in the end, honestly, ends up looking very similar to an evidence-based program. And if you're able to do something reliably over time, you're going to get to the outcomes. So thinking about, not only the process, but also what is a true outcome or transformation metric that is reflective of the work and is reflective of me doing the work at a high quality. Because we can always do the work and just kind of phone it in, but it doesn't mean that the people really receive the thing that they were supposed to receive or that they wanted to receive. So, sometimes people do pre-post or do other sorts of metrics that tell people, how much change happened over the course of time by us doing the service that we provided.
So you're very knowledgeable, and I know you've worked with many nonprofits. What inspired you to focus on sustainability for your work, as opposed to other areas of kind of growing and supporting nonprofits?
Yeah, when I started this work, I worked for the federal government for a number of years doing grant management and overseeing projects. And the biggest problem, like I said, was we wouldn't sustain work that we'd invested millions of dollars into. And so there became answers that bubbled up to the top, but the federal government did a really bad job about explaining those answers to the public.
Hmm.
And so once I no longer had those golden handcuffs, I said, well, why don't I just explain this? Because it's actually a lot of very helpful information and a lot of things that have been tried and true, tested at the federal level and been implemented by hundreds of people. Why wouldn't it work for just any nonprofit to be able to pick up these principles and embed them in their organization? And so, what I was really hoping to get to was to shortcut things for good do gooders, to make sure that people had less risk of failure. And if they were already working in this space, they'd have access to information that sometimes remains hidden unless you get access to the millions of dollars that the federal government gives away, which isn't always in the future for every organization. To be honest, it's a big burden. And so I wanted to make sure that that was readily available for the public.
Nice. And, I always like to kind of ask this one question of all of our guests, but what would be some advice that you would give a nonprofit just starting out on their journey towards sustainability? What's a couple tips that they can take right away and implement and start to see a pretty significant impact?
I think looking at their leadership structure is always a good one, understanding who are the leaders, even if it's an informal leadership structure, like we mentioned, community members and people who are volunteering for you, and really understanding what are the talents of these people and how do they map to what I'm hoping to accomplish with my organization. It's sort of a talent management piece of it, but a lot of the times we, especially small organizations, will take what we can get and we forget to also ask for what we need. And if we have what we need, great, let's move forward with this talent. But if we don't, then we need to take some opportunities to explore, maybe work with our local chamber of commerce or work with local business owners to make asks for the things that we need. The other piece that comes to mind for sustainability is really thinking over time. The diversity of your funding streams is so important. And I talk a lot about this. This is what a lot of my content is about. How do you diversify your funding streams? But having a regular time when you are looking at that and looking at it not only with one part of your organization, but multiple parts of your organization, even if you're two or three people, it's important for everybody to understand how money is coming in the door and where it's going at the very high level, at least. So, it might look like having a once a year budget meeting with your staff or having an open conversation with your board, not only about the budget and expenditures every month, but also about how that maps back to our goals for the next 3 to 5 years. And so just continuing to have those conversations right from the get-go, because sustainability isn't something that you need to approach 5, 10 years into your work. It's something that you always should be talking about as you're doing your work from day one.
I love it. And that's just a couple strategies of many that you have. So how can people get in your world? How can they learn more? I know you put out a lot of great free content. How can they learn more about what you do? Where can they follow you on social media? Where can they get in contact with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website, wendieveloz.com, is the host of most of my content. I do have a podcast called the Social Impact Level Up Podcast. We're available on YouTube and all the platforms for podcasting. And I have a newsletter on LinkedIn that's also called the Social Impact Level Up. So those are the places you can find me. I'm on all of the social medias, but most heavily on LinkedIn and Instagram. And I'd love to connect with anyone in your audience who is interested in exploring more about not only their sustainability, but executive coaching and training options.
And you mentioned earlier about a framework that you have. Is that available for a download, or can they reach out to you to get more information on that framework?
Yeah, it's on my website, wendieveloz.com/sustainability. So same website, just add the word sustainability after the backslash. And that's all listed there. There is a download, but there's also videos and other resources that people can get access to right now.
Well, that's great. Well, we're going to include all those links in the description below, so you can go ahead and check that out now. Wendie, thank you so much for your time today. This has been great, and thanks for being part of the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast and helping nonprofits scale to that $1 million mark and more.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
You got it. Thank you for tuning in to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. If you'd like free resources to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark, visit realtomkelly.com/playbooks. And because I'm committed to helping nonprofits maximize their impact and reach as many people as possible, contact us at hello@realtomkelly.com to explore bringing me in to speak at your next event. And as always, I'm looking forward to sharing more transformative insights with you on our next episode.